So let's talk about 15 possible troubleshooting ideas when you're having problems with focusing, because we don't want you to panic, so we'll go down the list. My first one, the one that's always common for me, there's a little switch on the lens that lets you turn your focusing function on and off. And if you put it on manual focus, no matter how much you press on this, it's not going to autofocus. Therefore, manual focus. That's usually my first clue. Oops, and I forget.
It's actually extremely common, and it happens to me all the time too. You guys have probably seen me do it. If you haven't, you will see me do it in the workshop where, especially when I'm shooting landscapes, I'll get my focus and I'll switch to manual focus because it's the easiest and quickest way for me to just lock the focus. It won't change after that. And then I forget. Right. And then when I go to shoot other things, it's not focusing. And that's, again, the first thing I always check is my autofocus actually turned on the lens itself. If not, it's actually mechanically disabled when you're on manual, so it'll only manual focus. Okay, so the second tip that I'd bring up if you're having issues focusing is to check the advanced focusing options. This happens all the time to me when I loan my camera to someone else.
Not to me.
Not to you, because you don't loan your camera out. So what you can do is you can actually go into the camera's menu. Now in this Rebel, we can go into the custom settings. And let me go ahead and get there. Custom functions. We can actually choose, for example, what the shutter button does, what the focus button does, and so forth. So sometimes, like when I loan it to, well, the most common culprit that you know is Matt. Every time I give it to Matt, he gives it back to me and my shutter is disabled for focusing. So when I go to press the shutter, it'll capture the image, but it won't focus. He always turns on the back focusing button. So he leaves the focus only on the back button and disables it from here. So the way that you do that is you can go to the menu, custom functions, and you can control what the shutter and AE lock button is gonna do basically.
Or don't land your camera out.
Yeah, or just keep it simple and don't land the camera. Or tell him to return it to the way it was when he borrowed it.
That won't happen.
So just keep in mind that you can change the functionality of these buttons on most DSLRs. So we can kind of customize to whatever your preferences are.
The other common one is maybe you're just standing too close to your subject. Each of these lenses have a minimum focusing distance. For example, with this one, I believe it is, holy cow, I don't know if I can read that. Which one? 7 feet? 2 feet?
2 feet.
2 feet.
Or no, 2 meters, 7 feet.
2 meters, 7 feet. Okay, so clearly you're way too close. So no matter how much I press here, it's not gonna work. I actually have to step 7 feet back in order for this to even work.
And see, if I don't want to take a picture, I just follow with my face really close to the camera.
Right, but then he'd look really wide if I actually got it.
Okay. Tip number 4 is to check the Viewfinder Diopter. Now, what is that exactly? Okay, let me bring up my Nikon here. The Viewfinder Diopter is this little dial right next to the viewfinder, okay? You can actually turn it. Now, the way that you know that you're having issues with the Viewfinder Diopter is because when you look through the viewfinder, it looks blurry, but of course when you take a shot, it looks totally sharp. It looks fine. It's just the viewfinder. So, what you do is you just use that diopter and you just turn it until basically your screen is sharp. Now there are, of course, technical ways of dialing it in correctly, but generally I just do it visually because it works totally fine visually, right?
So really what it is if you've got a problem with your eyes, maybe you're nearsighted or farsighted, and this is how you're going to be able to see better. Now tip number 5 is about low light. And when you're shooting in low light, no matter what, you're going to have a hard time focusing. So your best bet is to go ahead and select your center focus point as your tool when you're focusing. So let's see, for example, on here, I've got all these different options. Oh, look, it kind of moves and I can pick with my finger. But if I pick my center one as the one that I'm going to tell my camera to use as I'm trying to focus, it's the most accurate and it's the strongest one.
Yeah, it's a great tip in low light.
Okay, tip number 6 is another low light one, and it's using your focus assist light. So if I'm in really low light situation, my flash will pop up, it'll start flickering right before I click the button, and what that's doing is it's giving my camera assistance with light so that I could see, or actually the camera could see.
Yeah, and it'll get your focus. Some models, higher end models, don't actually have that, right? So you have to use a hot shoe flash.
Right, and then that'll do the little flickering for you.
Yeah, the hot shoe ones like a 580X will have an infrared autofocus assist beam. Now this is one area where I kind of like that Nikon's a little more forward thinking. On the Nikon, they actually have an autofocus beam that's built in right into the camera on most of their models. So it's really, really helpful. That way, you don't need to have that hot shoe flash, where you don't need to have the flash come up when you need that autofocus assist.
Now, tip number 7, looking for areas of contrast. Still, low light or not, that's probably one of the things that you should do anyway. So if you were shooting, let's say Pi was wearing an entirely white outfit, it's a little bit hard to get your focus sometimes if he's in bright light. But if you
that
were,
looks so awesome, right?
we're moving forward from that. So let's say his white shirt had stopped right at the neck, and that's an area of contrast. If you focused right there, that would help your camera find focus a little better.
Definitely. And if I'm wearing all white, well, you should probably run, because I don't know why I'd ever wear all white.
If you're wearing a veil, we would have a problem.
But that's exactly what we're talking about. Is yeah, those areas of contrast. You can even see that like on her shirt right now. These lines and stripes against the white creates a lot of contrast there. Very easy for a camera to gain focus, as opposed to like a solid suit.
Right.
I'd wear a suit, not white. Whatever.
You
wear
could
all
have
white.
worn a white shirt. I was just using. Okay, let's look at the couch. The couch is entirely monochrome.
I'm just kidding. Let's move on.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna say this. Tip number 8 is to avoid servo modes in low light. Servo modes are those modes that basically we're allowing the camera to track focus. Now those modes in general, just during daylight, are already kind of, well, sometimes they're inaccurate, okay? Now you add on top of that low light, you add on top of that basically low contrast, which is, it's basically the issue you run into in low light. In low light, we're losing contrast, and that's why it's kind of so hard to focus. So I would avoid these types of servo modes, these automatic tracking modes in the camera, because they're going to be highly inaccurate and kind of unreliable in low light situations.
So what that really means is you need to find your point of focus instead of letting the camera determine that point of focus for you.
Yeah, and for example, like when we're shooting, say, a bride and groom coming down the aisle, generally that's a very low light situation. I'm just kind of coming up with ideas of situations we'd be in. Rather than using an AF point and having it track, like you can have that servo track on the single, like let's say I set it to that top right AF and have it track all the way. Rather than doing that, I'm gonna use single shot AF, and I'm just gonna keep shooting over and over and over to get a new focus every single time. Because what happens is, as soon as that tracking AF misses, it'll track back and then forward, and it's a lot of time for it to go back, forward, and come back till you have focus. You could end up missing those moments.
Or
so,
let's say you're in a basketball court and you're trying to follow the shooter. It would be much easier for your camera to just, for you to track the player across the room rather than hoping that the camera will catch it for you.
Yeah, in a fully auto mode, yeah, definitely avoid that. Yeah. Okay, next, tip number 9 is to watch out for flares. Flares basically, well, they can be great artistic elements to have that really nice, cool shot of a model or whatever, and you have that sun coming in. It looks awesome. But in addition to kind of reducing contrast, creating that flare and bright look, it also makes it very difficult for the camera to focus. One tip and trick that I like to do is when I am trying to shoot with a flare, what I'll do is I'll actually block the flare with my hand. So I'll basically get my focus and my composition. I'll block the flare to get my focus, and then I'll hold the shutter down halfway. Once it's there, I'm gonna remove my hand so the flare comes in, and then I actually take the shot. That way I know that I've locked the correct focus. So just kind of look out for that.
Now, if you didn't want that flare, there's a couple things you should do. Using your lens hood for one, to avoid that extra flare if that's not what you wanted. And really what he means is, if the sun is coming in from behind pi right here and I'm trying to shoot this way, that's light coming directly into my lens. And that's what he's talking about, the problem. So if I had a lens hood, or maybe if I were under an umbrella or some kind of shade, it would help.
Blocking it so that it's not entering the light or entering the lens directly. Sometimes, I mean, the hood is amazing for blocking light generally if the sun's anywhere around here, but if the sun is directly behind your subject, there's no way that a hood is gonna do anything.
Tip number 10 is locking the focus whenever possible. In some of our shoots, if we've got our camera on a tripod and we know exactly where the focus is going to be and it's not going to change, you might as well just lock it in. That way it doesn't move. Maybe a landscape shot, or maybe even a room shot where you know your subject's not going to move at all. You've got a couple of options. You can use your switch, which, yeah, and then the one that we forget to switch out of, right? But you could use your switch to lock your focus in manual, because you already got it.
You get your focus once using automated, and then you switch it
so that it doesn't move. Or you could also use you could set your button so that you've got one of these to be an autofocus lock.
Yeah, generally you set,
I think it's,
yeah, it'd be one of these two.
Yeah, I prefer to use
actually
the switch.
It's the star one. Is there it is right there.
There's a star on
Asterisk.
mine. Asterisk. So you've got two options. So again, you place it, you focus, and once you know where it's going to be and it's not going to move, your subject and your camera aren't going to move, then you can just switch off to a manual focus.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice. On my Nikon, I have a button. Look, it says AEL, AFL. AE lock, AF lock. It's so intuitive.
Right. They labeled it nicely. I like that. Okay.
All right. Okay, next, what I wanted to bring up is to use the focus button to pre-focus when possible. So this is tip number 11. Now, this situation is like, well, let's say we're shooting a couple, okay, and we want to basically capture this really nice, intimate, and candid moment with them. We've posed them, everything's in the right place. We have, well, we have basically got the right composition and so forth. What I might do is pre-focus. So I'm just gonna basically, I could do it several different ways. Generally when I pre-focus, I just hold the shutter down halfway. So I'm just gonna basically get my focus on them, hold the shutter down halfway till I get my beat, and then I'm gonna cue the action. We do this a lot through the DVD where we're gonna cue the action after we have pre-focused. And all I'm gonna do is basically just spam the trigger at that point and just keep shooting over and over. Now, if you know you wanna pause, remember that when you let go of the shutter all the way, and then you press it back down, it refocuses, right? Mm-hmm. So if we want it to just stay, regardless of if we are lifting up and coming back down on the shutter release, we do need to lock it via one of those techniques, either the AF lock or actually switching over to manual. But pre-focusing is awesome because you can just shoot, capture the moment, and this is when everything is set up, you're ready to go, and that way you don't need to worry about focus at all.
Now, one note about that, when you pre-focus, you're hoping that they don't move from that exact same spot.
Yes, they have to be stationary, and that's the only time you would ever, like, yeah, pre-focusing during a sports game, that would be
not so good, not so good.
Kind of weird.
But if he pre-focused and I was right here and all I did was this, then you'd still get
Are you
everything.
dancing?
Yeah, shh, don't judge. Tip number 12 is about focus peaking. It's a new thing for some of these cameras. In fact, this Sony right here has it. In live view, in real time, it can show you exactly which item is in focus.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's like this moving highlight alert sort of that just moves and tracks whatever focal plane you're on. It makes it amazing for manual focusing, actually. I love it. It's also awesome for video too.
That's so cool. Okay, tip number 13.
Tip number 13, switch to manual focusing when your subject's on a similar plane. And here's what I mean. Subjects on a similar plane. For example, if my lovely co-host here, Michelle, were wearing her wedding dress and she had this little, have you guys seen those? Like, they're kind of the more vintage veils, right? The vintage veils that kind of go over the face, just small
netting.
little veils like that.
Right here.
Yeah, that netting is very, very difficult for your camera to really know what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to basically focus on her eyes and you have that netting in front, your camera's only gonna catch the netting. So in that kind of a situation, again, I flip to manual and I just shoot manually with this kind of a shot, and she does her dancey fingers,
Right.
which would be really weird if she was wearing a wedding dress. But if she weren't, I could use my manual focus just to focus on her eyes. And it's actually very easy to tell where that focus is when I'm shooting close like that, because I have kind of a lot of reference points between the net, between her eyes, between her hair and everything. So in certain situations like that, when your subjects are on very similar planes and the AF is gonna freak out, well, that's when you really need to just switch over to manual focus.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with it's so fine, it doesn't know exactly where to look.
Yeah, it's fine, and it's right in front of where, I mean, it thinks it's right on, and it is actually right on because it's catching the net. It's just your face will be blurry.
But you wanted something else, yeah. Tip number 14 is making use of live view plus what Pi just talked about, manual focusing. Mm-hmm. So here's what we do. I'm going to put my lens on manual. I'm going to turn on my live view function. Hold on. And with that, just using my eyes to look at the LCD, I can see what I want to focus on.
We actually do this a lot too throughout the course, and we'll zoom in on different areas to make sure that we have the critical focus. Live view and manual focus is an amazing tool. You combine that with focus peaking and you got a focusing machine. Okay, so tip number 15 is that newer cameras do have the option to use touch screen focusing when you're using live view. Now, Michelle really wants to show this off to y'all.
Yes, this is my favorite deal. So first I have to switch back to autofocus over here, click on my live view, and the way we do on our phones, you just pick the spot you want to focus on, and there it goes.
It's an awesome function, especially if you imagine if you're hand holding, let's say DSLR footage, like you're trying to record video of the kids or whatever you're doing. Rather than using your focus ring, if you're uncomfortable doing manual focus, that touchscreen is amazing just to kind of move around as people are moving in frame. It's also great on a tripod. It's just very handy dandy.
Or on the ground, or for
Absolutely.
a selfie.
Especially with the, you like the...
I like for the selfie.
Is that an articulating selfie?
Yeah. Focus on me.
That's
Focus
what the
on me.
articulating screen was designed for. Actually, the articulating screen is amazing. When you're on the ground, like she mentioned, you bring this screen up, and if you have touchscreen focus, you don't have to do anything. You can just zoom in. You can make sure it's focused over the area you want. It's a really handy dandy tool. All right, so that's it for our 15 tips when it comes to focusing. We ready to head on?
I am so ready. We'll see you guys on the next one.
Let's head on.